or special insight, gaining insight into the nature of reality. So Sutra Mahamudra, he's saying, has these three parts. First, the preliminaries, again those common preliminaries we saw, and then shamatha and vipassana. And then he says, tantric practices are twofold. Generation stage practice, which entails complex visualizations to stabilize the mind and manifest its essential nature. And two, completion stage practice, which enhances these realizations at the subtle and very subtle levels of mind. Completion stage practices may involve manipulating the body's energy currents in order to make the very subtle mind more readily accessible. Some authors add a third category, Sutra versus Tantra versus Essence Mahamudra. Essence traditions are exemplified by the Mahamudra and the Dzogchen systems of meditation. The Essence viewpoint asserts three levels of mind, coarse, subtle and very subtle. The early Essence tradition did not include extensive descriptions of spiritual practice. The extraordinary view of the mind was directly transmitted from master to student. The skillful means in the Essence tradition is this pointing out instruction. In this context, the master's job is 1, to assess accurately the state of the student's mind, 2, to directly influence the student's subtle mind so as to remove hindrances that might otherwise obscure realization, 3, provide a precise description of the mind's real nature, so that's the pointing out instruction, and 4, awaken the student to direct realization of the mind's natural condition. The extraordinary practitioner gains this realization once the master directly points out the real nature of the mind. Ordinary practitioners generally do not understand the pointing out instructions because their minds are too clouded by coarse level thoughts, mistaken ideas, negative emotions, and dualistic perception of the external world. Therefore, ordinary practitioners must first refine their minds through standard practices before the essence view can be introduced. In the original Mahamudra tradition, the earliest masters literally sang the disciples into enlightenment with poems called dohas. The mind's natural condition was directly pointed out by the master, who then gave instructions to negate any artificial activity during meditation. So that's the second part of the Essence tradition, is what's called non-meditation. So in the Essence tradition, if the student is at the right level, the master could literally point out the nature of their mind, often through these songs, these spiritual songs called dohas. And then point out the nature. The student would have a realization of the nature of the mind, and then the master would give these non-meditation instructions on how to sustain that state, to not go into any artificial activity to pop out of that state. So that's what non-meditation instructions mean. And he says the following, he says, the realization of the mind's awakened wisdom was a consequence of these pointing out and non-meditation instructions. This is Essence Mahamudra. Later in the tradition, Mahamudra practitioners first learned to refine the ordinary mind through mastering traditional generation stage and completion stage tantric practices, and then took up Mahamudra either concurrent with or following completion stage practice. This is Tantra Mahamudra. Still later in the tradition, practitioners first refined the ordinary mind through mastering standard concentration and special insight meditation, or in other words, shamatha and vipassana. And after some degree of mastery had been achieved, Mahamudra was then introduced. This is Sutra Mahamudra. Thus, Mahamudra can be a sutra, tantra, or essence practice, depending on which practices are used to refine the coarse and subtle levels of mind before essence instructions are given to address the very subtle mind. Any questions?
What is the name of the book?
Pointing Out the Great Way. There are, in the Kagyu tradition, there are sort of three main texts that they use, and what he's done is and each one of those main texts sort of emphasises a slightly different area of practice, and what he's done is, in his book, he's tried to synthesise all those three main texts into one. It's quite scholarly, academic, because he's a professor at university, but he's also quite a good practitioner, I understand. So he's not just an academic, he also meditates a lot. But he's tried to put it all together in one book.
He's teaching here every November for at least 2 weeks.
Yeah?
He's coming every week. Yeah.
Oh, very good, there we go.
Past 7 years.
Yeah, there we go,
I
see?
don't know, I took the first three,
Yeah?
first 3 years. But it's not, as you said, it's very academic, it's very good academic, but in practice, it's not get that high, okay? Get a good start. But
Good.
not more.
I don't understand something very basic.
Mm-hmm.
In the Gelukta, in the Sutra teachings, we study shamatha, vipassana.
In the Lam Rim teachings, or?
Yes.
Yeah, so you...
It sounds to me
Yeah.
that once you get to meditate on the emptiness of the mind, we call it Mahamudra Sutra. What is the difference between the Sutra's teachings and the Sutra Mahamudra?
What we're focusing on in terms of our Vipassana practice. So generally, often in the Sutra teachings, like for example the Lam Rim, when we come to the Vipassana practice of emptiness, then they tend to use the classic approach that we find in texts from like Chandrakirti, where we're the person, where is the me that seems to be here? So we are doing our investigation by trying to find the person, emptiness of person. So that's sort of the classic approach here in the like the Lam Rim system and probably other systems. Whereas of course in Mahamudra, it's the same emptiness we're realizing, but our focus is not so much the person, but the focus is the mind. So here in Sutra Mahamudra, when we talk Vipassana, when we engage in the emptiness practice, we're investigating the mind, not the person, usually. That's the difference. The same realization.
And one specific question. You mentioned, I think, that probably according to the Vajrayana, we can reach the very subtle mind, the clear light, only through Tantra practice. Is that right?
So the question is, you can only gain access to the very subtle mind through tantric practices.
Yes.
In the Sutra level, in the Theravada Mahayana, this doesn't exist because there's no method to. You won't see any talk about this in Theravada or in the Mahayana because there's no method to gain access to it. You'll see a lot of talk about these levels, but not this. It's not mentioned.
So do they accept that they can realize emptiness?
So Theravada Mahayana, this doesn't exist. Therefore, we gain access to this, and this is how we get to nirvana and enlightenment.
So I can do it without Tantra.
According to Theravada Mahayana, yes. If you talk to the tantric people, they have a different story.
What about a master like Jetsun Kaka?
Yeah, I think all the high-level masters in Tibet were all practicing Tantra. Tsongkhapa for sure.
Is it necessary or because it's shorter?
Well, both actually. Shorter. I mean, I don't hesitate to say that because often what happens is, you know, people hear about all these things, they hear about Tantra, and they hear that, oh, I can achieve enlightenment in this life. And people go, that's for me. This other stuff, ooh, no. Too much work. Don't have time for that. I want Tantra. In fact, better, I want these pointing out instructions. I want, because this generation completion stage also seems like quite a lot of work. I'm not sure I really want to do that. Just give me the pointing out instruction. I'll just sit there and you sort of zap me with these pointing out instructions and I'll see the clear light. And then, of course, people sit there and they just space out and worse, they think they've realised something and they haven't done anything. So these are levels of practice, and each one really is the basis for the next level. So if we want to practice at any one of these higher levels, we really need to have some decent basis. Otherwise, we're just really fooling ourselves. I mean, we're really just wasting our time.
You mentioned that the book that you just read from a compilation of the three major books.
Well, three of the major books that the Kagyu traditions use.
What are the three major books?
One is called Moonlight on Mahamudra, Dakpo Tashi Namgyal. Another one is called Pointing Out the Dharmakaya from Ninth Karmapa. And the third one, I can't remember, but I think they're two of the three.
Which is the Clarifying the Natural State? Is that one of them, Namgyal?
I'm not sure. I can't remember. I have to look in this book again.
When we achieve a very subtle mind and we actually experience emptiness, you mentioned that the energy goes to the heart, is it trying to think more with the heart? And
Well, there's no thinking going on at that stage. I mean, thinking only happens here.
yeah,
I mean, there's not even any thinking here.
so we're trying not
Definitely none here.
So it's the stage of not thinking with a cognitive thinking, but the thinking with the heart, or with the energy of the heart.
So remember, the completion stage practice is about withdrawing all the subtle energies to the heart chakra, causing that to open, and then the very subtle mind will become manifest, and we just rest in that state. We're just resting in that state, realizing emptiness. So in that state, there's no, if you're in that state in meditation, there's no sense of a me. There's no sense of time. There's just the experience of the very subtle mind in emptiness. That's it.
And that's the stage of opening of the heart. So can you
Well, opening the heart.
Chakra.
Yeah, I mean, it's opening the heart, I think, is something different. Opening the heart is loving kindness, compassion practices. So that's not what we're talking about here. So we're talking about just causing the very subtle mind to become manifest. So opening the heart, generally, we talk about being more kind and compassionate and so forth. That's not really what we're talking about here. Having said that, of course, if we're resting in emptiness, whether it's at this level or this level, if we've realised emptiness, then when we come out of that, the natural expression of that is loving kindness and compassion. But that's something else.
So this is the Galug's gradual approach.
No, this is just general. This is also Kagyu.
Okay, so by like for example,
I mean, actually in Galuk we don't have this.
Yeah.
So this is all Kagyu.
Yeah. So like for example, in
So-
Dzogchen it will be different. In terms of,
Okay. So that's what he said in his text here in the Kagyu tradition, and also in Dzogchen. They talk about these two types of practitioner: the simultaneous one and the serial one. Serial one is the one who does preliminaries, shamatha, vipassana, generation, completion, pointing out step by step. The simultaneous one, who's the one who gets really just the pointing out instructions, but the fine print is, of course, that person has done all this work previously or in a previous life. So both in the Kagyu and Mahamudra, in the Mahamudra Dzogchen, they both have this idea of serial and simultaneous. In the Dzogchen, which is very similar to Mahamudra, also they talk, I think, about pointing out instructions, but here, in this area, they also talk, same here, Sutra, they talk about Shamatha Vipassana generation completion stage, so they use similar terms here, but here, there's a term in Tibetan called tekcha, it means to cutting through, and this is the sort of the cutting through. And then they have another thing called tergal, which is direct crossing over, which actually I think is something beyond all of this. But there are some, of course, similarities, because they're both nature of the mind, but there also are some differences. They're not same. Dzogchen and Mahamudra. We need to take a break. Quick question, we'll take a break.
Maybe it's a quick question, but a long answer.
If there's a long answer, we'll do it after the break. But
if you can just articulate more about the two vehicles, the cause vehicle and the result vehicle.
Yeah. So the causal vehicle means we're looking forward on the path from the perspective of the cause. Here we are now. There's the goal of nirvana enlightenment. These are the practices we need to do to get to that goal. So we're looking forward. So that's what causal means, from the perspective of the cause. We're at the cause, there's the result. Tantra Vajrayana has the opposite perspective, that the whole practice is done from the resultant state. So here in the generation stage, we do the whole practice from the enlightened state. So we arise as the deity, we arise in the fully enlightened form, and we do all of our practices from that perspective. So we are doing it from the perspective of the result, all practices in Tantra. So that's why it's called resultant vehicle. Okay, let's take an afternoon tea break and come back at 3:15, and then we'll move on to the next section of the text.